Once upon a time, in a vast village so great it could rival a city, peace and unity reigned. Even wolves in human skin and sheep that walked as men dwelt among the people without fear, for harmony was their crown. The land thrived beneath the rule of a great king whose wisdom was thunderous yet gentle, whose strength brought safety and whose justice was unshakable. But when death claimed him, grief swept through the land like a storm. His queen wept bitterly, left with only 3 sons, too young to bear the weight of the throne. Whispers of their loss spread swiftly beyond their borders, and the neighboring kingdoms, envious of their wealth and unity, seized upon the moment like vultures circling prey. Messengers arrived with threats disguised as gifts, with demands hidden in honeyed words. The youngest son of the late king, clever yet only 15, was unready to steer the course of peace. The wise men of the land, grey of beard and heavy of heart, gathered beneath the moon to decide their fate. And in their fear, they turned to the one man whose name alone commanded dread, Oba Asha. Oba Asha was no savior of gentle heart, but a man of fire and blood. Fierce, unbroken, abandoned by his wife who could no longer endure his monstrous hungers, he was known for devouring the flesh of animals raw, his teeth dripping with the life he consumed. Yet he was brave beyond measure, and none could deny his strength. To the wise men, such terror seemed a shield against the kingdoms that threatened them. And so, they called him forth, cloaking their desperation as trust, and gave him the charge of protecting the land. Pride swelled in his chest as he accepted, for though he spoke of duty, his soul burned with desire for power. By his side stood his 2 twin sons, left behind by their mother yet raised in the image of their father, fierce, strange, and sharp-eyed. Already, whispers of their unnatural strength rippled through the village. Though the people praised their new rulers with trembling voices, none knew that in choosing Oba Asha, they had opened the gates of a darker destiny, one that would bleed into their children's children. The twins grew under their father's shadow, swift in violence and hungry for honor. When Oba Asha was entrusted with the kingdom's safety, he wasted no time in feeding his sons with power. He armed them with charms older than memory and taught them to wield cruelty as if it were justice. Soon, their names struck fear into friend and foe alike. Oppositions within the council fell silent, their tongues cut short by intimidation, their voices drowned by blood. Villagers who once sang of peace now whispered in corners, too fearful to speak openly of the shadows growing over their land. But the shadows deepened further still. The twins began to crave what no mortal should desire, godhood. One son, Taiye, carried a cruelty sharper than the other. Ambition burned in his eyes, a hunger that reached beyond thrones or crowns. He longed not merely to rule but to unseat the heavens themselves. The great beings who once watched over the land, the eagle who saw beyond time, the mother goddess of the waters, and Io, the god of breeze and cold, were ignored by Oba Asha's rule. For Taiye, they were not protectors to revere but obstacles to consume. Deception wrapped itself around Taiye like a cloak. One night, he lured his twin brother into a ritual masked as brotherhood. There, with spells twisted from the marrow of the earth, he turned his own blood into stone, immortal but unmoving, a statue that wept in silence. Then, in an act that shook the foundations of the land, Taiye devoured his father alive. Oba Asha's screams echoed through the clouds before they fell silent in his son's belly. When the dreadful feast ended, Taiye sat upon a throne of clouds, a storm circling him, his veins filled with stolen power. He began to create life, but his creations were not whole. They were horrors born of broken breath and shattered form, mockeries of humanity. Some had 2 heads, others had eyes where feet should be, or legs that reached where arms should rise. They gasped for air, each moment a struggle, for the life force of his petrified twin was not enough to sustain the thousands he birthed. To keep them alive, they fed upon one another, pressing and crushing themselves for hours to survive the night. The rivers grew thick with blood, the air stank of decay, and terror spread across the village. The people wept and hid as the monstrosities roamed, demanding sacrifices in exchange for survival. Fathers delivered their sons, mothers their daughters, for no blade or shield could match the horrors. Blood flowed into the rivers until even the water goddess herself was choked with grief. Io stood from afar, his winds restless, his heart bound to the mother goddess who sang to him in secret. But she, though powerful, hesitated. For centuries she had endured, watching the world drown in cruelty, her lover silenced in longing. She could not bear to lose him, nor to watch him suffer under Taiye's growing tyranny. Yet Taiye's ambition knew no boundary. His wrath spread into the heavens, where even the eagle of sight and prophecy soared. When the eagle raised its voice to warn the people, Taiye struck it down, binding its wings with chains of smoke. Uio rose in fury, winds howling across mountains, but Taiye ensnared him too, crushing him until he turned his essence into a tree that rooted itself in the middle of the mother goddess's ocean, so that at least he could still hear her songs though he could no longer reply. In that silence, her heart broke, her rage simmering but unspent. The horrors continued, their hunger unending, until despair drove the 3 young sons of the late king to desperation. They were but children when their father died, yet in their grief they lifted their voices in song. Their cries rose into the night sky, raw, pure, a call that pierced through the veils of hesitation. The mother goddess, moved by their despair, rose at last. From the depths of her ocean, she stood, the waves wrapping her in shimmering light. She could no longer watch the land drown in horror. She could no longer remain silent while her people bled. She cloaked herself in disguise, taking on the form of a mortal woman of surpassing beauty. Her hair shimmered like moonlight on water, her skin glowed like polished ivory, and her eyes carried the sorrow of ages. She knew Taiye's gaze would not resist her. One evening, as he peered from his darkened throne over the village, he saw her walk deliberately across the palace grounds. His cracked voice broke into song, a rasping tune of desire, for he believed her to be a gift fallen from the sky. Blinded by her beauty, Taiye descended as a breeze, carrying her into his halls of shadow. He claimed her as his own, keeping her close by his side. He adorned her with riches of broken lands, bones polished into jewels, and crowns fashioned from the skulls of fallen chiefs. But among all his gifts, there was one most dangerous, a necklace forged from his own power, laced with secrets of transformation. With it, she could vanish, reappear, or alter her form at will. He placed it upon her neck, not knowing he was placing a dagger in her hand. For 10 long years she remained with him, her heart cloaked in silence. She spoke softly, sang when he commanded, smiled when he demanded joy, but in her soul she studied every step he took, every weakness his vanity revealed. She watched him rage at his creatures when they failed to please him, watched him exhaust himself feeding life into horrors that gasped and wept for breath. She learned how easily blinded he was by his own pride, how deaf he was to suspicion when beauty lingered beside him. She waited, patient as the ocean tide. One night, when the sky was heavy with storm, she rose in secret. Using the necklace, she shifted her form into shadow and bound him with the very powers he had bestowed upon her. She led him into the deepest pit beneath the earth, the sacred ground of the ancestors where no evil could rise unaided. With chants of waters older than memory, she sealed him beneath the soil, his cries muffled into silence, his horrors vanishing into dust as if they had never been. The land exhaled, the rivers ran clear again, and peace returned at last. But not all was undone. Uio remained as the silent tree in the heart of her ocean, listening but never answering. The great eagle, bound in chains of smoke, lingered unseen, its sight trapped between worlds. And in her own heart, the mother goddess carried the sorrow of deception, for she had lain in the house of the monster to bring him low. Her victory was costly, her spirit marked with grief, but the people rejoiced, never knowing the depth of her sacrifice. The 3 sons of the late king took the throne, ruling together in unity as their father had never done. They built anew, erecting monuments to the ancestors and planting gardens where once blood had flowed. Festivals of peace rang across the land, and generation after generation carried the crown. 400 years passed, seasons rising and falling like waves. Children played where horror once dwelled, men and women sang without fear, and the name of Taiye was spoken only in whispers, a story to frighten disobedient youth. Yet peace is never eternal. Far away, in another city beyond the borders of the kingdom, envy and hatred brewed. There lived a man descended from rulers who had once held a throne but lost it during Taiye's reign of terror. His family never recovered. They were stripped of power, mocked by neighbors, cursed to live in shadows. The weight of that shame pressed upon him like iron, and when his own wife was taken by a wealthy man from the village, his fury burned hotter than fire. He vowed revenge, not only for himself but for every ancestor whose crown had been stolen. The ambitious man's hatred grew until it became a living thing inside him. His nights were haunted by dreams of crowns taken, thrones shattered, and blood running down palace steps. He could not sleep. He could not eat. His wife's betrayal at the hands of a wealthy villager only deepened the wound, and he swore that neither gods nor men would deny him vengeance. He began to gather slaves, 20 souls broken by chains, men with hollow eyes and skin stretched thin from hunger. To them, he promised freedom, but in his heart he knew only their deaths could unlock his desire. On a night when the moon was dark, he led them to the burial ground of the ancestors, the very place where the mother goddess had sealed Taiye long ago. He drew symbols in ash and blood, chanting words stolen from forbidden scrolls. One by one, the slaves fell, their bodies crumbling as their souls were torn from them to feed the ritual. Their cries were swallowed by the earth. Their bones turned black. The ground shook, and from the deepest pit rose a laughter that curdled the blood. Taiye, the devourer, the blasphemer, the fallen twin, clawed his way back into the world. The ambitious man trembled, for he saw not victory but doom. Taiye rose with eyes like burning coal and a smile that split his face in two. He looked upon the one who had freed him and mocked. "You seek revenge? I will give you mine, and yours too. Let us see how your enemies suffer, but remember, their screams will be mine before they are yours." With those words, he placed his shadow over the man and consumed him, leaving behind only an empty husk. Taking the man's form, Taiye walked into the village like a returning son. His first act was swift and merciless. He found the wealthy villager who had stolen the man's wife and killed him in front of her eyes. She screamed, clutching her swollen belly, for she carried the man's child. But Taiye's laughter silenced her, and he seized her as his prize, binding her with cords no mortal hand could break. To her, he whispered of his plan. 7 newborns must bleed, their lives feeding the ashes of his twin so that together they could rule once more. In the days that followed, strange calamities overtook the land. Crops withered in the fields, their green turning to dust overnight. Rivers soured, carrying the stench of rot. Storms rolled endlessly across the skies, lightning without rain, thunder without mercy. The people grew restless, whispering of curses and forgotten gods. They gathered the wise men, who sought counsel in the flight of vultures. The vultures circled, shrieked, and descended, and with every wing beat their message was the same: "Bring us the mother goddess." The words struck the village like fire. Mothers clutched their children, men argued in the square, chiefs broke into factions. Some cried that the goddess must be surrendered if the land was to be saved. Others swore they would protect her, for without her, they would all perish. The air filled with distrust, neighbors turned on neighbors, and the old peace fractured like pottery cast upon stone. Far away, in the depths of her ocean, the mother goddess stirred. She felt the breaking of her seal, the absence where Taiye had once been bound. She rose from her waters and went to the burial ground, but when she arrived, she found only emptiness, the pit gaping like a wound. She touched the soil, and it wept with the memory of the slaves whose blood had paid for his return. Her heart tightened, for she knew the time she had feared had come. From the shadows, Taiye watched her. His laughter carried on the wind, though no lips moved. He smiled with the same hunger he had always carried, a hunger now sharpened by centuries of silence. Revenge still burned in him, not only against men, not only against gods, but against the very one who had once deceived him, the goddess who had dared to bind him in the ground of his ancestors. His teeth glinted, his eyes blazed, and he whispered to himself, "Now the dance begins again." The cries of the people rose like smoke, twisting into the skies. Desperation drove them to the ocean, where the waves lapped as if listening. Men, women, and children knelt at the shore, weeping, pleading, calling out to the mother goddess to give herself up. "Save us," they cried. "Deliver us, even if it means your end." Their voices trembled with both reverence and betrayal, for fear had turned their worship into accusation. The air shifted. A whirlwind tore through the crowd, flinging bodies like dry leaves. Taiye had come. His presence was fury clothed in flesh, and the ground shook under his feet. He laughed as he slaughtered them, his blade and teeth tearing through the helpless. Blood painted the sand, and the waters turned dark once more. When his hunger was sated, he devoured the fallen, their souls screaming as he swallowed them whole. The ocean recoiled at his filth, polluted as in the days of old. Few survived to tell the tale, and those who did bore eyes hollow with terror. The mother goddess, hidden in her silence, watched. Her heart was torn between grief and rage. She had seen destruction before, but never had her people begged for her surrender as they did now. It was not their pleas that wounded her, but their fear Taiye had planted like weeds in a garden. In his lair, Taiye kept the abducted woman alive. She trembled in endless dread, her belly swollen with life. At last, the time came for her child to be born. But there was no midwife, no cradle, only Taiye's clawed hands. With a cruelty that scarred the heavens, he ripped the child from her womb while she still breathed, her scream echoing into the night. He raised the newborn high, its first cry mingling with its mother's last breath. "The first of 7, he declared, his voice shaking the trees. But before his blade could fall, A wind unlike any other swept through the chamber. The child vanished from his grasp, carried into unseen arms. The mother goddess had intervened, her power breaking through his darkness for the first time since his resurrection. Her form appeared only as a shimmer, but her defiance was clear. The newborn was safe. Taiye roared, his fury like thunder tearing the skies. Blind with rage, he sought a wound deep enough to match his humiliation. His eyes turned to the ocean where the mother goddess often lingered. There, in the middle of the waters, stood a tree, majestic, solitary, its roots sinking into the abyss, its leaves whispering in the breeze. It was no ordinary tree, though Taiye did not know it. It was Io, the god of breeze and cold, her secret lover, who had bound himself into that form so he might remain close to her, listening to her songs though unable to answer. Taiye's wrath knew no bounds. With fire conjured from the pit of his soul, he set the tree aflame. The waters hissed, the sky screamed, and the branches writhed as if alive. Slowly, the tree burned until it was nothing but ash sinking into the waves. The mother goddess let out a cry that split the heavens. It was not the wail of a goddess, but of a woman bereaved. For centuries, she had sung to Io, and though he could never respond, she knew he heard her. Now his silence would be eternal. He was gone forever, his soul scattered with the smoke that drifted above the ocean. Her sorrow hardened into fury no force could tame. The sea churned, mountains trembled, and even the stars seemed to dim at her grief. Then came a vision, a flicker of wings in her mind. The great eagle, still bound in Taiye's curse, appeared to her in spirit. His voice, deep and ancient, filled her heart. I cannot fly, but I can see. Take my sight, and you will know the path. With his gift, her eyes opened beyond the veil. She saw the truth. Taiye could be destroyed, but only at a cost. Her own life would be the offering, the final act to end his reign. The mother goddess did not tremble. She gathered her strength, clothed herself in the fury of storm and flame, and prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of gods and men alike. The village fell into a silence so deep it felt like the world itself held its breath. No birds sang, no beasts prowled, not even the rustle of leaves disturbed the air. The people hid within their huts, trembling, while shadows crept over the land. It was as though all creation recoiled, waiting for the clash that would end or unravel it all. At the edge of the ocean, where waves clawed at the shore, Taiye stood, his form swollen with malice, eyes blazing like dying suns. Across from him, the mother goddess emerged, no longer disguised, her full radiance unfurled. She bore the sorrow of ages upon her shoulders, yet her eyes burned with a resolve stronger than stone. Their first roar tore through the heavens, shaking earth and cloud alike. Mountains quaked, rivers surged, thunder cracked as if the sky itself would shatter. It was no mere battle, it was nature itself awakening to witness judgment. Then, for the first time since creation, every force of nature rose as one. The oceans rose in towering waves, the winds howled with unrelenting fury, fire burst from hidden veins in the earth, and the soil itself rumbled with defiance. All bent their strength to the mother goddess, answering her grief and rage with their power. Taiye bellowed, his body engulfed in fire as the elements tore at him. His flesh burned, his bones cracked, but his laughter did not falter. Consumed by the flames of creation, he fell and rose again. From his mouth, twisted and choking, spilled forth a figure long devoured. Flesh reformed from shadow and ash until it stood whole, Oba Asha, the great king who had once faced Taiye in defiance centuries ago. The villagers, watching from afar, gasped in terror and awe. Oba Asha's body trembled as life coursed back into it, his spirit forged in vengeance. Without words, he seized Taiye with the strength of gods and men combined. Their struggle was brief, for the prophecy had ripened. Oba Asha's blade, forged of grief, struck deep. Taiye's scream split the sky, louder than any storm, before his form crumbled into dust. His twin, bound by blood and fate, perished in that moment too, his cursed line ending forever. Oba Asha stood silent, his eyes heavy with centuries of sorrow. He had avenged his sons, avenged his people, but the weight of their absence crushed him. Slowly, his body hardened, his flesh turning to stone. He became a statue at the heart of the village, eternal in his mourning. When Taiye fell, the world exhaled. The rivers cleared, running pure once more. The skies softened into blue, and the earth smelled sweet with renewal. The terror that had haunted generations faded like smoke, leaving behind only silence and healing. The mother goddess stood alone at the shore. Victory was hers, but her heart was not free. Io, her secret love, was gone forever, his voice unheard, his tree reduced to ashes. She had saved the child, saved the people, and ended Taiye's reign of terror, yet grief clung to her like shadow. She turned to the ocean, her eternal dwelling. With one final glance at the land, she let the waters rise to embrace her. From that day forth, she remained beneath the waves, not gone, but watching. The villagers would say that when the wind brushed across the sea, it was her sigh. When the tide sang at night, it was her lullaby to the children she had saved. Peace fell upon the land, but it was a peace scarred by memory, a reminder of sacrifice, of gods and love, of betrayal and redemption. And though the mother goddess lived ever after, her heart was bound to silence, forever aching for the songs Uayo once heard but could never answer. Like, share, and subscribe for more untold African legends.